Hey, so you're thinking about getting a hamster or mouse, and you clicked on my ugly mug. Well, I do appreciate it. That's great that you're trying to do some research before you actually get a new life into your house. Now, real quick disclaimers. I am not an expert. I'm literally just a guy that worked almost 10 years in a pet shop, and I feel like there's a couple of things that you should probably know before you even go into the store. Also, this is going to be adult content. You have to be 18 plus, at least where I am, in order to get a animal. And so, if this is something that you're planning on showing your kids, watch it all the way through first because I'm not going to pull any punches. So, most people think that a hamster or mouse is going to be a great first time starter pet. And it is, and it isn't. Okay? I'm going to try and scare you off from having a hamster as a pet, not necessarily as much of a mouse. So the reason why I'm including both of these, in case you're wondering, into the same video is because as far as habitat, nutrition needs, they are very, very similar. The only difference is that their main source of food is going to be a bag with a mouse on it or a bag with a hamster on it. That is pretty much the only difference when it comes to raising these guys. So I recommend, first things first, you think about the entire lifespan of this hamster or mouse, which is only a couple of years. So if you're planning on getting this for a kid, and that kid is 7, plan on having the death talk when they're 8 or even 9. Okay? Just keep that in mind, that there's not going to be a lot of time that you have with this. They're going to love it, grow attached to it, and then you're going to have to talk to them about death. So just think of that ahead of time. So also, these guys bite. Mice less often than hamsters, but they do bite. This is not a safe pet to have. If you want to have one of the safer pets, honestly, a leopard gecko would be just as easy, but not as dangerous as far as when it comes to teeth. So this is not going to be, actually, pretty much anything with a mouth has the potential to bite. It just depends on how hard and how much it's going to hurt. But keep in mind that this is a tiny little animal that sees you as a gigantic predator that is trying to eat it, and they're going to act accordingly, okay? Doesn't mean that they're dinks. It just means that they think that their life is in danger. So before you even get the hamster or mouse, I always recommend, and I'm going to do this in every episode, that you get the habitat first. Main reason, well, first of all, you're probably going to forget something. That way, when you go back to the store in order to get the animal, you can pick up the thing that you forgot. But mostly, it's just not polite for the new family member to have to wait in a little cardboard box that they come in while you're trying to set it up. Also, these guys eat cardboard, so you might have an escapee while you're trying to hurriedly set it up. So a lot of people come in trying to get everything at once, both the setup and also the animal. I don't recommend it. I recommend getting the habitat first. Also, this is going to be a good opportune time, whether it be a hamster or we'll talk about guinea pigs in another video, for you to find out if you have an allergy to the bedding. I actually have a very severe allergy. It doesn't happen if the bedding is just sitting there, but if it's getting either fluffed up in order to be laid down on the habitat, or if it's getting cleaned up, my allergies go insane. And if that's something that you are going to have to deal with, it's better to find out now. And most stores will take all the stuff that you have back as long as it's no more than halfway gone. So if you buy a bag of the bedding, and we'll get into the bedding later, but as long as that bag of bedding isn't more than halfway gone, yeah, they can't resell it, but they're also not going to make you just eat that price because they understand, hey, it didn't work out. We still want your business, so let's try something else. Let's see something else that might fit better. So, grab the habitat first. Now, keep in mind, most of the habitats that people think of when they think of hamsters or mice are the ones with the big colorful tubes and stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Most of those are designed for either mice or small hamsters. Small hamsters would be robos, dwarves, Dungarian. Now, if you want to get a teddy bear or a fancy hamster, it might be a bit of a tight squeeze for a habitat from that company. But you really got to be careful when you're selecting your habitat. Now, most of these types of animals can squeeze through very, very thin places. So if you happen to get one that the bars are just wide enough, they can squeeze through. I've actually used aquariums a lot of the time and had a screen on the top, and they've been able to climb up through the water bottle hanging, doodad, and then do like a pull-up, an impressive pull-up, like one that I can't do, and manage to get themselves underneath and outside of the screen. So you might have an escape artist on your hands, so plan accordingly. Whatever habitat you have, try and make sure they can't squeeze through the bars. Try and make sure that if they can lift the lid, that it's either clamped or it's weighted. But habitat's very important, and also there's a couple of things you want to buy with it. So you want to get the paper crumble bedding. I don't recommend wood chips, especially not cedar. A lot of people, depending on their age, might have remembered growing up with having cedar chips for their small animal. Now, back in the day, that was because cedar has a very great smell, and they're not going to smell the animal as much as the cedar. Problem is, it's actually bad for their health. We found out later on. So, unfortunately, cedar chips are no longer a viable option if you're going to be getting a small animal. So make sure that what you're getting is just a nice crumble bedding, preferably one that's not dyed, but usually if it's dyed, it's with a non-toxic dye, so don't worry about that. I personally don't recommend getting one that has odor eliminating. It's just such a new thing. Basically what it is, it's like, if it's baking soda or, something in there that helps reduce the odors. I'm sure it's perfectly safe. It's been around for forever, but it's only been recently added to bedding. So I don't know for a fact if there's not any long-term health effects with that. I recommend just going au natural. I recommend that with pretty much every video that you see from me. I'm going to recommend doing natural solutions first if possible. And in some cases it's not going to be possible, but I'm going to try and let you know the ones that are. So, you get your habitat, you get your bedding. Maybe you have a little house or whatever. One thing that's going to be very important is a wheel. And I'm sure that anybody that's ever had a small animal before knows a wheel is going to squeak. If it's a metal one that's upright, it's going to squeak. If it's a plastic one that's upright and says it's a silent spinner, it's going to squeak. I believe that the quietest ones are what look like a slightly tilted saucer that they run in almost kind of a diagonal sideways fashion on. But even those are going to make noise, especially because I've seen some that like to push it against the side of the glass and then do it that way. I don't know why they do it. It just seems to be like they enjoy the noise. And keep in mind, if we're talking about mice, we're talking about hamsters, they are nocturnal. That means that they're going to be at their most active at night when you're trying to sleep. Most kids want to have that hamster or mouse in their room with them. So if you have one that's going to make a lot of noise, and you don't have a white noise generator, or if the kid's not a heavy sleeper, it's going to be an issue. Think about that ahead of time. So we've covered the bedding. Ideally a house. If you do a wooden house, you're going to have to replace it quite often because they will gnaw on it. And that's something very important that I want to bring up right now. You're going to think food. You're going to think water. You're going to think shelter. What you're not going to think of necessarily, unless you've done your research, which again, I definitely recommend. I am not an expert. I don't have this be your one-stop shop. If you're going to be getting a living creature with you, I recommend that you do your research, go on forums, go to a pet store and talk to a person that actually has had one. I mean, I just can't recommend enough that it's probably more than what you initially thought going into it. So, their teeth grow all the time. They need to constantly keep them pared down. It's a design thing. They're always going to be chewing. Most of the time in the wild, they would be making, nests. They would be, chewing very hard items to try and get a little bit of nutrients out of it. So their teeth always need to grow. So they need to have, in addition to the food, wood block chews. And I can't recommend this enough. Do not take this from a stick from outside. You have no idea what might be crawling on it, whether visually or even microscopically. I want you to get safe, processed, wood from the store. If it has some dye on it, it's fine. It's always going to be non-toxic dye. They actually, for a little treat, they make some out of apple wood, which tastes really nice for them. But they need to be able to pare those teeth down. If those teeth keep growing without being checked, that's either going to mean that they die from starvation. I told you I wasn't going to sugarcoat things. This hamster or this mouse is going to die, and very soon. So, again, just be warned. So they either won't be able to eat, or you have to take them to the vet. The vet has to put them under. The vet has to shave the teeth down. Do you know how expensive that? You don't even want to know how expensive that is. I don't care if you are liquid. That is not a bill that you're going to want to have. When you could have just bought a couple dollars worth of, wood that's going to last you months. All right. So when it comes to the food, you have a few options. So there's two different types. There's one that's loose. You see sunflower seeds. You see all this stuff in it, and it's just loose. Now, that stuff is fine. It's fine. Here's the problem. They like to take it out of the bowl bring it into their nest with them, and you're not going to be able to sift through all of that. You're going to throw about half of that food away. So if you want to be a little bit more penny pinching, um, I recommend getting the lab blocks. So what they are is they look like just little cylinders, and so you throw them in there. It's made of the exact same stuff. It's just compressed into a tight little thing. And so when it comes time to do a bedding change or whatever, you can pick through and find them, put them back in the bowl, and that way you're not throwing away as much. So I think that it's a lot smarter when it comes to conserving and not wasting food. However, and this is just in one experience, so again, this is not a scientific trial, but we had to, in our store, had to switch to a loose one because we ran out of the lab blocks. And the mice wheels, usually because it's a saucer that is kind of diagonal, with a wheel, their waste, their pee and their poop, usually just, gets flung out. When it's the saucer, it can kind of stay on there, so their wheels can get pretty poopy pretty quickly. And we noticed that their poop was a lot harder and more pellet-like, which is what it's supposed to be. They should never have loose stool, and I'm about to get into that. But we found that the loose stuff, they had a little bit less of a messy waste, so maybe they're eating just the things that they kind of instinctively know that they need, like, oh, I feel like I need sunflower seed right now, or what have you. So with the lab blocks, it might be a tiny bit more mess, but it is definitely a lot smarter when it comes to lack of wasting food. With the loose stuff, you're going to end up throwing a half to 3/4 of the bag away. It's not going to go in their stomachs, it's going to go in the bedding, and you're just going to throw that away with the rest. So it's going to be up to you, and it's not going to hurt to play around with doing either one. But a really important thing that I mentioned just now was loose stool. So we'll get into the steps of when you first take them home in order to help prevent this, but something I need you to be fully aware of is wet tail. Wet tail is a kind word of saying a bacterial infection that causes them to diarrhea and then die, usually within a few days. This happens very quickly. It is one of the most common ailments when it comes to hamsters. Not necessarily mice as often, but when it comes to hamsters, that is probably the one thing you're going to have to deal with when it comes to them getting sick, is wet tail. So some of the signs are they're going to sleep outside of where they usually do. So if they're usually in their house and they're sleeping outside of their house, that's usually a sign. If their breathing is a lot different, that's usually a sign. If they're lethargic when they usually aren't, it's a sign. But the biggest one, but this isn't always true, is that if you look at their vent and it's wet around, the fur's wet around it, then that is absolutely what's going on. It doesn't always happen though. Sometimes you can get a dry vent and that's still wet tail. You need to act on this immediately. Okay, this is going to happen to you, to the poor guy, very, very quickly. Don't wait and see if it's going to get better. Don't think, oh, maybe he's having an off day. Get him to a vet immediately. They're going to give him something. Usually it's SMZ, but they're going to need to have a mouthful of that, usually 2 times a day for 7 days. So get some thick gloves, because a hamster that is not feeling well is probably going to bite, even if it's one that has gotten a relationship with you and definitely likes you and has not bitten you in months. If they're not feeling well and they're kind of disoriented, they're just going to think anything might be a predator and just bite as a Hail Mary. That's actually another reason why I usually recommend mice. They don't seem to have as many instances of wet tail, if at all. Another thing that you're going to want to try and do is pair them up together. Oh, we got one, let's have a buddy. Well, with hamsters, almost all of them are male because the breeders keep the females to keep breeding. So males, unless you buy them from the same habitat at that store, there's a good chance that they're not going to get along. So don't try and do it. If you're going to get a second hamster, usually get a second habitat. However, with mice, usually more with the females, but mice typically can get along together. They're more of a community animal. With males, sometimes they can be bullies, and what they'll do is they'll attack the other one's butt, top of the butt, not the butt, but they'll scratch on the back. So usually you'll see aggressive behavior and you'll hear squeaking a long time before you actually get any potential damage. But definitely separate them. But females seem to get along a lot better as long as there's not another male present. And I can't stress this enough. Please, please, please do not try to have a litter on your own. A lot of people think that it sounds like it's going to be a fun time. You'll get babies. You'll give them to friends. It never works out the way that you think. Nobody's going to want to take them. It's going to make more than you think. Trying to separate them from the mom before they start having sex with each other is a nightmare. It's just, don't do it. I can't recommend it against it enough. So I'm going off on a lot of tangents, but I'm hoping that this is making you realize just how much can be involved with even something as simple as you thought simple as a hamster or a mouse. So we have, real quick, I want to make sure I covered everything with the wet tail. So get them to a vet as soon as possible, and just don't wait. It happens very quickly. And all right, so back to the supplies. So we have the food. We have a water bottle. It seems like common sense, but I just see it happen so often that please make sure that the water bottle is low enough for them to be able to get it without having to like strain themselves and get maybe like a little bit of a lick. It seems like a pretty obvious thing, but I just see so often, even in a store that is made for animals and people that actually own said animals, I've often seen a lot of water bottles that's like, poor thing is, desperately trying to get some. So, and also look out for leaks. Leaky water bottles. A lot of the times it's just because the cap has an O-ring that fell out while you were washing it. But leaky water bottles will get into the bedding. It'll make the bedding wet. You have to throw all of that away because if it stays wet, they can easily get sick. So leaky water bottles are just a bane of my existence. Some of them, it just comes as a factory defect. Others, like I said, if the O-ring in the cap falls out and you didn't notice it, it's going to slowly, and it's going to be slow. It's not going to be obvious when you first tilt it upside down, but it's going to be a slow leak, and then boom, now you have to do all the bedding. It's just a hassle, so keep an eye out for that. And also those water bottles, occasionally take a bottle brush to the inside. They do get algae on the inside, which just isn't good. So they have their normal diet of the pellets or the loose stuff, but that's not going to be their full nutrition. They do need veggies. You can't get the same nutrients from raw veggies once you've compacted and processed food like that. They can't get all of their stuff from nuts. So definitely, we do it daily at the store. I recommend doing it daily if you can. But give them a little pinch of a fresh green. So for both the mice and the hamsters, both of them enjoy kale, cabbage, zucchini, bell peppers. Believe it or not, they don't actually have the taste bud for capsaicin. So for the bell peppers, it actually just tastes like yummy greens to them. It doesn't taste like peppers. So don't feel like you're just, giving them hot sauce. Now, when you do give them the greens, I highly recommend giving them Benebac. What that is it's beneficial bacteria. And you just do a light sprinkle on the greens because guaranteed they're going for the greens as soon as you throw them into the habitat. They love it, and so you know for a fact that they got their Benebac for that day. And this is the most important. When you first take a hamster or a mouse home, I recommend giving them a big old helping or serving, whatever you want to call it, of the Benebac laced greens. The reason for this is because a lot of times if one of these guys is going to get wet tail, it's going to happen because of the stress of the move. Afterwards, it's going to happen because you don't clean the habitat out enough. But the most likely time that one of these guys is going to get wet tail is when you first take him home and he's super stressed out and you didn't give him extra beneficial bacteria and you didn't leave him alone for the first few days. All right? I might say this a couple of times in this video because this is so important. A lot of parents trying to get this for their kid for a birthday present or what have you, they didn't get the habitat first. The poor thing's in a box for a lot longer than it needs to be while you're trying to set the habitat up. And then the kid immediately wants to play with it. Well, no, all right? This is a poor little creature that has moved to an entirely new environment against its will and is completely surrounded by predators that it doesn't don't want to eat them. So for the first few days, just leave the poor thing alone. Let it get used to the environment, the smells, the sounds, the sights. Let it get used to that it's not going to die immediately. And when you do your first couple interactions, it's not a bad idea to do it when they're already going to be naturally active towards the night. It's not a bad idea to say, open up the habitat, or what I like to do is I like to just take the house, flip it upside down, let them, if they want to, crawl into the house, and then I take that and then I put it to my chest, and now they have a surface, because oftentimes if your hand is the surface, they might do a test nibble just to see, what is this soft squishy stuff? Is it food? So if you have the plastic house upside down. Now that's their footing. And then what you can do is you can try and do a little pet on their back. If they freak out, well, that's normal. I mean, especially if they're a young one, they don't know that that touch didn't mean immediate death, imminent death. So it's going to take them a little bit to get used to you handling them. So just, go in spurts at first. They'll get more used to it later on. It's going to be a slow process. I'm just trying to prevent you from getting bit, okay? This is a very real thing that happens a lot. And unfortunately, when you get bit, you're not thinking. You might do a little fling action. Thing goes across the room, broken legs. I mean, again, I'm not holding back here. I'm going to be very blunt about some of the worst parts about having a pet. So when you first hold them, I recommend it being on their terms, and especially if it's going to be a first-time holder or a kid, you should either do this on the ground or you should do this standing over a bed. That way, if you do have an accidental droppage or if there's suddenly an escape attempt, that this one is not going to do a long fall onto a hard surface. Okay? So stand over a bed or just bring the whole thing down to the ground, and keep in mind these guys are really great at escaping detection from bigger predators and making homes in hard to reach spots. So if you do have an escape attempt, I hope that you try to at least make it hard to get into small corners or behind, fridges and cabinets and stuff, because they will find something to chew up, make a nest of, and then only come out when they're foraging for food. And it might be days before you can get them back. So these guys, make sure that you've tried to cover all your bases and block all the exits. But they are a very active animal. So that's why it's important to have the wheel in there. You also do have the option of the clear plastic ball. I'm sure you've seen them before and you know what I'm talking about. Here's a couple of things about the clear plastic ball. It's fine, it's whatever. They do pee and poop while they run. So that is something you're going to have to clean out. It might even get a little bit on the floor. It's gross, but it happens. So just keep that in mind that this is a very real thing. They're going to go while they're in it. Having said that, they have a very specific size of the ball that you want. First of all, if it's going to be a guinea pig, or quite a few different animals, but mostly the guinea pig, some animals can't do the ball at all. Some animals can't have their spine bend up that way at all. So just don't even do it. First of all, I've seen a guinea pig in a ball. I don't know what's going on. The world is not supposed to move this way. But even if they did, they'd actually be hurting their back. So same thing when you're finding the appropriate size ball for it. So if you have a teddy bear hamster or larger, fancies teddy bears, and you get a dwarf hamster one, then their poor spine is going to be going like that. So make sure that the ball size is correct. Also, it just goes on with a little bit of a tension fitting, and this thing's going to be banging around everywhere. I recommend putting a tiny little piece of Scotch tape where the top meets, just so that way the top doesn't accidentally pop off and then the thing escapes. Also, again, it seems like it's common sense, but block the staircase. The poor thing, poof, poof, poof. We don't want that. Please, just keep in mind where it's going to go. And again, it seems like common sense, but if you have a predatory animal in the house, if you have a dog, if you have a cat, I don't want to discriminate against cats. Cats are awesome, but cats are very much 100% carnivorous. They will never outgrow the need to hunt. Dogs, we've actually bred so that if we have them well trained and we tell them, leave that thing alone enough times, they're going to be like, oh man, all right, well, I guess I won't eat it. Cats are never going to let it go. So you need to make sure that the habitat and anytime that you are interacting, that it is a cat-proof environment. Again, this seems like common sense, but I'm just trying to prevent heartbreak, because a lot of things just don't occur to you when it's a first time doing anything. You're going to make mistakes doing a first time of anything. Look at this podcast. This is such low production value, and yet I'm doing it, and I'm loving it, and it's hopefully going to get better. But for right now, this is the best that you're going to get, and this is the best that I can do. And the important thing is that, you tried new things. So if this has not completely talked you out of getting a hamster or a mouse, hopefully I talked you maybe from getting a hamster into getting a mouse. Because again, I've made a couple of points why I feel like they're a slightly better one to have as a pet. A little less often biting, more of a chance of being able to pair them up together. They stay small, so you can have those smaller, more fun habitats. There's a lot of things going for him, but if you still want to get a hamster, then hey, more power to you. And congrats on the new addition in your family. And I just really hope that you do the responsible thing. And like I said, look to other sources than just my dumb face, because I maybe have just scratched the surface of some of the things you might want to consider. But hopefully you listened to me, you learned a little bit, you were entertained, and you're definitely going to give it a lot of thought before you take a life into the house. And I appreciate you listening. Have a good night.